Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Legal Tech Week, the show where we get together and talk about the top stories in legal tech and innovation over the past week. It is, what is it? It is January 6th, 2023. And,
Has anything ever happened on January 6th?
jeez, I didn't even get the significance of that. Hopefully, we don't get stormed in the middle of this. Um, I'm Bob Ambrogi. Do we even need to do introductions anymore? I mean, everybody knows who the heck we are, but I guess we can do it. I am Bob Ambrogi. We've got a few of our regulars who haven't been here regularly back, and a few of our regulars who have been here regularly not here. So let's go around and do introductions. And Caroline, you want to kick us off? Haven't seen you for a while. Glad to see you.
Yes, it's great to see you guys. Thank you for having me back. So Caroline Hill, Editor-in-Chief of Legal IT Insider. I am based in the UK, but write about legal technology trends, news, etc. across the globe. And it's lovely to see you all.
All right. And Victor Lee.
Hi, everyone. My name is Victor Lee. I'm Assistant Managing Editor for the ABA Journal, covering business of law and technology.
Joseph Patrice.
I'm Joe Patrice. I'm a candidate for the Speaker of the House. And I think, I've not gotten through on the last 12 ballots, but neither has anyone else. So I feel like I'm doing pretty well. I'm from Above the Law and the podcast Thinking Like a Lawyer. And now that's about all I've got.
I think you've got the better job right now. I wouldn't switch to Speaker of the House.
Fair enough.
Stephanie.
Hello, I'm Stephanie Wilkins, Editor-in-Chief of Legal Tech News at ALM.
And Niki.
I am Niki Black. I'm the head of subject matter expertise and external education at Affinity, which is and My Case. That's the parent company of My Case. And I write legal technology articles for the Daily Record, Above the Law, ABA Journal, and sometimes other outlets. And
sui generis.
That's right. And I do write a blog where I republish my Daily Record articles. And Bob reminded me this week that I have been derelict, and he's correct. Since the acquisition happened, the two acquisitions. I got a little busy, but I want to start regularly republishing.
I didn't say you were derelict. I was just wondering whether it was still a thing.
It could have still been a thing. It just felt that way. Sometimes certain things just have to give, and that was the first easy one to give. So, but I'm glad you reminded me and brought it up. So,
yeah.
Very
well, I hope you prioritize this podcast over that blog. And give something up.
Of course.
So last week we talked about our top stories of 2022 and even made some predictions for the year ahead. Should have given maybe fair warning to Victor and Caroline, because Niki, you weren't here last week and wanted to kind of go back and revisit some of your ideas about the top stories of last year. So in terms of providing equal time, if Victor and Caroline also want to weigh in on their top stories, I didn't give either of you any warning to prepare on that, but let's before we get to this week's news, let's go back and talk a little bit more about the top stories of the year, and so just so Niki, you can have an opportunity to share your thoughts about that.
All right, and thanks. And the primary reason that I really wanted to do that was because I wrote I write the last column of my ABA journal every year on that. And so I did write a whole column. So I did want to just really briefly go over, because I know I don't want to rehash what you all talked about last week. But there were four that I really hit on, and I'll just go through them quickly and let me know if you disagree in the comments. The continued acceleration of legal tech funding and acquisitions, and it's the story that almost isn't the story, but it's still a story because it continues to just be so notable compared to how things used to be. And also, there's a lot of unusual things happening already this year, so it'll be super interesting to see where we end up with it moving forward, especially as we've got these headwinds into a possible or almost certain recession. So we'll see what happens with that. But the those acquisitions and all the funding rounds were certainly notable, and I'm sure that there will be some to come, but possibly less this year. The layoffs and the pivots to ward off the recession were super interesting, and we're certainly seeing those trends moving forward, and we're going to talk about that today and some of the stories that other people have planned to talk to you about today. An increased emphasis on legal tech ethics and competence. That for me was super interesting because for my daily record column, I tend to focus a lot on ethics issues that intersect with technology as they're handed down. And there's just been a fantastic amount of those since the pandemic hit, and it continues to be, there continue to be really interesting ones handed down, both related to remote work and also, there have been some coming down about phones and the contacts on the phones and confidentiality with those and other information that apps access as well. So that's interesting to me. And it's also wonderful because it's just an indication that technology is at the forefront and is absolutely a part of practicing law. So that's why the bar associations are now providing more and more guidance to help lawyers do that, because it's really a given that they're going to be using it. Then last but not least, the robots are coming, Chat GPT and all the potential uses with that. And that's been discussed ad nauseum. And I think we're going to talk about it again today. So I won't go into that anymore, but those were really the 4 top news items for me from last year, some of which we're going to see moving out into this year as well.
Absolutely. I think we definitely talked about all of those last week. And in terms of Chat GPT or GPT 3.5 and GPT 4.0 and everything else beyond that, we could probably just like devote a segment of this show every week for the next year to that topic, because there's going to be a whole lot of stuff happening and coming down the pike in that area. And we do have a couple of stories today we can talk about that relate to that. But Caroline, again, I didn't give you any fair warning on this, and you've got a different story picked out to talk about. But I mean, did you have any thoughts on kind of what jumped out at you over the headline of 2022?
I don't have it, no, and to be honest, I off the top of my head, I can't think of one headline, but just riffing off what you said, just thinking on the feet. So I think investment, like Niki said, was obviously one of the interesting themes, certainly, and I think that what was really interesting to me was this year of 2 halves concept. So in the first year, we saw huge amounts of investment. So I think it was, I'm not going to cite numbers actually, but so there was a massive amount of investment that carried on through 2021. It carried into the first half of 2022. And then the second half of the year obviously has been a completely different picture. You've obviously had very different economic factors, and it will be really interesting to see. So I've been writing quite a lot about the economy and sort of the different ways that that impacts on IT and how they should be responding to that. I've sort of done a 3-part, actually I've only written the first 2 of a 3-part series about the economy. I think that's something that in the second half of the year everybody is talking about. So far as the IT directors I've been speaking to, it hasn't had an impact on, obviously during the pandemic we've seen some really exciting development, and as yet it hasn't done what it normally does, which is stop projects from going ahead. But and IT directors that I spoke to are quite optimistic about that the economy won't impact on all the exciting stuff that they've got going on. But behind the scenes, I've spoken to some strategic advisors who have painted quite a different picture, who've said we're speaking to the C-suite, and actually they're already talking about pausing big tech implementations, big projects. So it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out this year, and whether the economy gets better or worse stable, and whether, obviously, ideally they'll carry on investing in technology. But the reality, as we all know, is that doesn't happen. We can talk till we're blue in the face about, it's going to create efficiencies and cost savings, but actually in a downturn, they'll start stopping investing. So that's for me one of the, and then probably the other one thing, I won't go on much longer, but is the legal operations space. So, this sort of growth of CLM has been a really interesting trend, and looking at Gartner's Magic Quadrant report for CLM, it was interesting to note the implementation issues. So there's been a big flight to CLM within the in-house sector, but actually not always the right thing and not always for the right reasons. And I think that given the huge amount of investment in that space, it'll be interesting, given the downturn or whatever we're calling it. I think legal ops heads, in-house teams are going to have to be very careful, because CLM companies, vendors are going to be in a difficult space, potentially having taken on all that money, and there's a risk that they're going to be trying to sell at all costs. So I think that it's going to be, the onus is very much going to be on in-house teams to make sure that they do need the technology that they're buying. I think that's quite an interesting space as well.
Yeah. Legal tech customers not buying the right tech or for the right reasons. I'm shocked, but what do you know?
Yeah, it's not new, is it? Sorry.
Yeah, right. Like dog bites man, whatever. Man, Victor, again, different story for this week. But I mean, did you have any thoughts on just kind of what jumped out at you from last year, since you weren't here last week either?
Yeah, and actually, I mean, when Niki and I were putting that list together, because I mean, other than a couple columns this year, I'm her usual column editor for the journal. Yeah, I mean, like, and I think we mentioned this on a previous episode, where it's just like, it seems like every year we end up putting us, because she's done this column for, I think, 3 or 4 years now for us. And I feel like every year we end up putting something on this as, oh, so much was invested in legal tech this year. I think we made a joke about it, about how we just have like a template in there for with the bullet points loaded in, and just put in, like, the names of the companies and how much money was spent. But it's interesting too, because it is like juxtaposed to that was in all the layoffs and all these companies that, like Caroline was saying, that are worried about the economy and worried about what's coming. And so, yeah, who knows? Maybe this year going forward. I mean, we're already seeing it a little bit in not just the tech sector, the legal tech sector, but also just with law firms too, like laying out. Like, I think there's a story that Above the Law broke about Goodwin Procter, about how they're going to lay off a bunch of attorneys and whatnot, and staff members and things like that. So that'll be interesting to see that going forward. I mean, I think we've all been waiting for the other shoe to drop on the economy for a while now. And we've seen a couple of kind of maybe some false dawns, maybe some false alarms, but if it does happen, then that's usually where it'll get felt the most. So it'll be interesting I mean, it'll suck, but it'll be interesting to see how that affects the level of investment going forward. And then also, I mean, one thing that we also talked about that didn't make the list was just kind of talking about just the ongoing difficulties regarding cryptocurrency, and just kind of like how you have people get, you have some fraudsters out there. You have wild fluctuations. Crypto one day, it's booming. The next day, it's lost, like, however much value. And it just again, it just seems like one of those. I don't know if it's a fad or if it's or what, but like, either way, it's very volatile, and it it's probably something that needs to be at the very least addressed. But if for law firms out there, lawyers who are getting into the space or investing in it or accepting it as payment, they have to make sure they do their homework and make sure they aren't being taken for a ride by someone like the Friedman, whatever, I don't remember his name, Friedman Bank or whatever. So
Yeah.
allegedly. So yeah, I think so for me that was one of the ones that was another one of the stories that maybe didn't make the cut, but I thought was a big one.
Yep.
Interesting. We're all talking, and obviously the Goodwin thing is a big deal too. We're all talking about this recession, and it's definitely true that law firms are freaking out like something's going to happen, but the numbers just aren't there. I say this because today was the release of the jobs report, and University of Michigan economist that I follow, economics professor that I follow, was just like broke it all down and tweeted out this morning. He's like, this happened, this happened, this happened. That means that anybody who thinks this is a recession is bananas. And yet, law firms seem to largely think it's a recession, despite all the evidence to the contrary.
Yeah. All right. Well, any more thoughts on 2022 before we move into the first week of 2023 and talk about some of what happened?
Good riddance.
Haven't we been saying that for years, though? I mean,
Yes, yeah, right.
we say that every year.
Well, we got a bunch of interesting stuff that happened this week, but on this topic, I guess, of layoffs and how the recession is affecting legal tech companies, we've talked a couple of times about Reynen court. We were more or less offering the obituary for Reynen Court, and yet there's news today, Stephanie, of Reynen Court. So what's going on?
I mean, well, the roller coaster ride continues. I can't tell you exactly, but yeah, they announced today that first, I mean, the only official announcement I saw was that they're now making their app store available to individual users for the first time, free for a 12-month free subscription. It seems to be more limited than their bigger enterprise level subscriptions of it. They cited tough times in it. I think they tried to spin that a little bit towards law firms and lawyers can't afford technology. So maybe that's the tough times. Although following everything else, that seems questionable. And then a couple hours later, turns out Christian Lang is leaving. It's not a firing as far as you can tell. It looks like he's going to stay on in some advisory capacity, and he hasn't said where he's going next, but certainly does not bode well, those two combined pieces of news. So I feel like whatever positive spin anyone might have tried to put on the first official announcement is pretty dampered, in my opinion, by the exit of Christian Lang.
And he lives over there too, right? So like,
well, he was just promoted 2 months ago, also.
Yeah.
Sorry.
What'd you say?
He's moving back to the States.
Right. Well, and yeah, and that's kind of my thing. Like, he had relocated over there, so like leaving is not like, oh, the place down the street just offered me a job. He's like, it's a serious move. He has to come back, and yeah.
I think this is part of the cost-cutting, further cost-cutting exercise that they're doing.
Yeah, who's left there? I mean, so legal tech trivia is that he lives in the apartment owned by Jeroen Plink, who's the investor in the legal technology hub, legal tech directory, and on the board of Casetext and other things. I'm not sure I even understand the news that came out today. I mean, I don't know exactly how individuals at law firms use Reynen Court, because I mean, the basic idea of it was to have this sort of sandbox deployment platform where firms could test cloud applications in a safe and secure environment. I mean, how does a individual lawyer or IT person or whatever at a law firm go in and do that? I don't get what that means, but
I don't either. I mean, it looks like am I on mute? No, I'm not.
No.
It looks like the other levels where they seem to, I guess I would assume, make their money, these premium and enterprise levels give you unlimited access to white label version of the software, as well as single sign-on integration and other tools, and also lets you deploy and manage cloud-based apps in private cloud-based infrastructure that you can control, is what it says. So those are the extra bells and whistles of the platforms that are not in the free thing, but I don't know.
All gamers know that when it goes free to play, there starts to become microtransactions, and that seems like what we're hearing there.
I assumed it was sort of a way to get more people in, and then when they realize there's more they could do with it, then they'll pay for it. It's just a way to get in. It's the free trial. It's how they get you in with the free trial of Amazon Prime, and then
12 months is a long time for a free trial, though.
Yeah,
I don't know what's up with that particular number.
We talked about this on a previous episode, like not even all that long ago. I don't have an encyclopedic memory, but it was like 6 or 7 weeks ago. We had a discussion about this, and one of the things we talked about was one of the problems, challenges facing them was that, my take was a lot of what they do is really cool for small lawyers who don't necessarily understand tech to be able to have a safe environment to do that. But their marketing was entirely to exactly the kind of customer that doesn't need that. Big firms that can afford IT departments and consultants of their own. And so it was a mismatch of a good idea that just happened to be aimed at people who didn't need it. And maybe that's where we are now.
So the feedback, so I've got quite a lot of feedback, although I've been slightly remiss about actually writing any of it. But so it's great to be able to talk about it here with you guys. Right at all. So I've heard that it was the feedback I've had so far is quite prohibitively expensive, and that also in terms of law firms that now they are becoming more cloud savvy. Now they've got their own Azure environments that actually some of the things that Reynen Court addressed are less of an issue in terms of security, etc. So, but so there's so I think there's been a lot of issues that perhaps that it no longer remedies. But then in terms of the individual access, so the feedback I've got so far, although obviously it's very new today, so the idea, one of the vendors said, I like the idea of opening up access to individuals. From a vendor perspective, it potentially enables a bottom-up growth model that's very different to the top-down model you get from working with centralized procurement gatekeepers at law firms. So it'd be interesting to see how this, whether this can get them out of what's a really tight fix at the moment.
Yeah. Joe, I'm not sure I agree with you that this was sort of a market mismatch, because I mean, I think very much the intention from the beginning was that big firms have been hindered in adopting cloud technology because they're concerned about the security aspects of using the cloud, and therefore they want to go through these deployments on their own servers in order to kind of test them out behind their firewall. And that whole process of getting that licensing in place and doing those deployments and all of that can take forever, and the testing and sales cycle and drags on forever and ever. And so the idea is to say, let's create this kind of sandbox idea or whatever, where you can go in and we've containerized all this stuff, make it easy for you to deploy. We've got the licenses all in place for you, so you can just do it. I always thought it was a really good idea, frankly. So I think that as I think Caroline's point that the expense was probably an issue. I think some of the software products had trouble kind of setting up the whole containerization and actually just getting onto the directory in the first place. But in theory, it could have made sense.
Sorry, you go.
I was just going to say to that specific point, maybe friendly amendment of what I said is 4 to 5 years ago, that might well have been a perfect match. I feel like, especially post-COVID, law firms have figured out that they can do cloud stuff. They figured out that they can test cloud stuff on their, I think the market has changed in a way in which those firms are now robust enough to kind of get around it.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Well, in part, what they provided was a bridge to the cloud. And once everyone's over that bridge, they don't need the bridge anymore. And so I think in some ways they created a product that reduced the need for the product in the long run. So, or a service, if you will. So
I agree with Bob. So and actually speaking to vendors, they do sort of say that, this whole idea, it's not just that the law firm can do it, but it's about that whole sales cycle, isn't it? And the fact the law firms are more familiar, they've got these cloud environments that addresses the security bit. But for the startups who need to get things done quick, they don't want to go through the same RFP, they don't want to have the same conversations, and they can't survive often within the normal sales cycle of a law firm. So actually, I still feel that Reynen Court answers that problem, which is, how you sort of speed things up and how you stop them having to repeat the same exercise. You go, right, well, this is where we are, and then take it from here, which makes it, I think, I still see the business case, even in the current environment, personally. Go mute.
So then do you think this free subscription will help them in any way?
I'm not, to be perfectly honest with you, I think one of the issues they're going to face, I think they're going to have to build up trust again. I know that obviously they've got serious backing from some serious law firms who will want them to succeed. I do feel like, they're going to have to it's a trust from speaking to people, within the knowledge management sector, they're going to have to earn trust back, I think, because what they're doing is they're saying, you can trust us to do this, to sort of get you past the stage. And, and Andy will know that, they're going to have to rebuild some of that trust in the market. And I personally hope they do. I really like them as an organization. Obviously, you've had a lot of departures. So Rich Rifkin has now gone to Intap. He announced on LinkedIn. So that's another one of the senior people who's no longer with Reynen Court. So yeah, no, I think, but I mean, I hope they do. I personally, I think that there's a real place for them in the market, and they've obviously had a lot of money, a lot of investment from law firms. But I think, you know, I do think they're in a very tricky position.
Well, and plus they're without that whole sort of, I don't know, implementation or deployment layer or whatever for an individual employee. What are they? Basically just a tech directory. And guess what? I have a tech directory. Legal Technology Hub has a tech directory. There's other tech directories out there for the legal world, it's not. That's not a business model for what Reynen Court was trying to achieve, in the past, given the kind of financing they've had, I don't see it really being survivable for them as an alternative. But maybe I'm just not understanding what they're doing right now. All right. So let's see. Wait. Back in the way back days of Saturday Night Live, when Chevy Chase used to do the news every week, he used to do this continuing gag story about Generalissimo Francisco Franco is still dead, and I'm wondering how RICOH is RICOH still dead?
So what's interesting is I actually don't have the most recent news on this. So RICOH went down last week. We didn't really get a chance to talk about it because we were doing our prediction show, but one of the biggest e-discovery hosts crashed. It went down. They pulled it off. They said there was some fear of unauthorized access, and out of an abundance of caution, they took it offline. Then they just didn't bring it back. Days went by. They kept telling customers, we're investigating. It doesn't look like there's been access. Then, of course, they said there was no compromised data or access. And then they updated that with there's been no compromised data and no indication of access to databases, which led some people to wonder what that meant. Obviously, it might well be an innocent rephrasing, but we're dealing with lawyers. So whenever you change something like that, it's just a big red flag. Like, why did you change your phrasing to something more specific? Time went on. Eventually, they said earlier this week they were going to be back Wednesday, when marking a whole week down. They were going to be back online at 8 a.m. Then they informed everyone at 8 a.m. that it was going to be later in that day, probably. And that's where I last heard. So it may be back. If it is, though, it was still down for a whole week, and it was still an instance of no one necessarily knowing what happened, whether data had been seen or seemingly not compromised. That's one thing that they were willing to claim, whatever, how specific that term is. But, this is always the concern. We've said one of the benefits of the cloud and these sorts of services is it's a lot easier to put all your eggs in one basket and then watch that basket. But, sometimes that also makes that basket a target. And sometimes you end up with this sort of situation. Oh, my favorite part, though, is as it was going down, of course, they sent since you mentioned old school Saturday Night Live, let me be old school too. The legal office of RICOH sent all of their customers a letter that they could use. They could hand out to people, judges, and say, like, please excuse me from not meeting my discovery deadline, signed Epstein's mom. So that was my old school reference for anyone who gets that one.
Yeah. I mean, it must have been, they could be talking about a ransomware attack when they talk about files not being accessed or that kind of thing. I mean, that may be in a ransomware attack. I mean, they can lock down all the files but not access them, it's conceivable that that's what they're talking about. We don't know, but it certainly sounds like something like that. Yeah. Who knows? All right. All right. So in other news this week,
I kind of wish Joe had used the RICOH Suave headline that he put on our what was we have an internal Google Doc that we use to put our list of stories on there, and he put RICOH not Suave on there, and I was hoping.
I sure did.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping he had put that on the original post as the headline, but yeah,
I wanted to mention that because a few people in the comments were like, "Where was RICOH not Suave?" And I was like, "Oh, don't worry, it's in the internal document."
but how many people reading Above the Law do you think would actually get that reference though? I mean,
that's the sad thing. I think I ended up, I debated whether I'd put Epstein's mom in there. I think I ultimately did. But I certainly know that I am basically the last, I'm probably the youngest person who was going to get Welcome Back Kotter references. But I still put it in there because principles.
I think it's funny that the viewers know you so well that they predicted that you would latch onto that concept of RICOH Suave.
I just assumed that was the actual title, knowing you.
I did too, until you just told me it wasn't.
That's the best. That's the best compliment writer-wise, that everyone was like, what you clearly were thinking was ... I
think Welcome Back Kotter's got to be still airing on some cable network somewhere. But
it was on Nick at Night for the longest time. Yeah, but I don't know if that's still around.
Oh, it's still around. Nick at Night, though, is showing like shows from the early 2000s at this point, I think.
I'm going to be singing that theme song all weekend in my mind.
It's a good one.
by the lead singer of Love and Spoonful.
Yeah, that's right, too. John Sebastian.
Nick at Night now shows Friends.
All right, that's good to know. All right, well, I think we've covered everything important here. I'm going to take my story, I think, out of order here. Just I think it was a notable story this week of a merger that I sure as heck didn't see coming. I thought it was a really interesting one. The merger of Lawyerist and Affinity Consulting. These are two sort of consulting, coaching companies in the legal tech, law practice management space. Lawyerist started out as a blog way back when by Sam Glover, and then kind of morphed into this, resource for solo and small firm lawyers on how to build a firm, and a bunch of articles and videos and all of that. And then they, in more recent years, evolved into becoming one of these practice coaching services where they, lawyers, as I understand it, kind of subscribe to their service and, get regular ongoing coaching and consulting on building out a law practice. And it's, by all accounts, been a pretty good business for them. And then, Affinity Consulting is one of the really best known legal tech consulting firms, focused more on the implementation side. You get net documents at your firm, they come in and help you get it all set up, whatever. But a partnership of some 80 or so people, many of whom are more than 80 people who are, very well-known names in the legal tech world, is, a couple of, I think, former tech show chairs among them. Any solo, small, or even medium firm tech conference you go to, there's going to be somebody from Affinity on the panel talking about legal tech. So the merger was, I think, really interesting, and they're going to maintain the two brands still. Lawyerist stays Lawyerist, also, I think, interesting is that Aaron Street, who had been CEO of Lawyerist until last year, and he left, and then Stephanie Everett stepped into that role. But Aaron is coming back into the company and rejoining this merged company. So it'd be interesting to see what they do. I mean, they're talking about kind of, cross-pollinating in a sense, that this whole sort of coaching model of Lawyerist can sort of move up into some of the more mid-sized firms that Affinity works with, and that a lot of Affinity's tech expertise can maybe sort of trickle down in the sense of being kind of packaged up and made available to smaller firms in a more affordable way than direct consulting. So I don't know, interesting news.
I
Wait,
think
you
it's a-
you didn't expect this? You know, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. I'm gonna keep referencing things before I was born until we're
Well,
gotten through
it's jumping
everything.
around in different shows now. Like, I mean, different,
Yeah,
Unfortunately, that was not before I was born. Spanish Inquisition was before I was born, but not,
I think it's
not
a
the
really
joke.
oh good.
I think it's a really interesting and smart partnership because what the cloud has always meant for firms that deal with implementation is that it's often in some ways reduces, especially as you get into the solo and smalls, the amount of money they can make, right? Because when you're not dealing with constantly having to come in every year just to reconcile the software, and do new software updates onto their premises-based systems. When the cloud removes a lot of that from the table so that people don't need IT firms in that way. They need them to maintain their hardware, but not to deal with all the licensing and all the updates and all the conflicts between software. And so, but what people do need as the cloud becomes more and more prevalent is guidance. But it's not always that long-term guidance, but it's that guidance up front. But that guidance up front doesn't give you this annuity client, for lack of a better word, that's going to need to pay you every year. But that one-off guidance is necessary. And then when they may need to upgrade or add new things to the mix, I think what it does is it provides both of them with more leads in the funnel that they can cross-pollinate, which is a word that you just used, Bob. But it's a way for both companies to use the branding that they already have, the familiarity in the industry that they already have, the clients and leads that they already have, and kind of amplify them, and also provide a lot of value, because lawyers oftentimes don't want to do the upfront research themselves. They want someone to tell them these are the best companies, but the bar associations won't do it, or that this is the right tool for you. And so this is a really interesting way, I think, that it's going to provide firms of all sizes with that kind of consultation and advice, both on a one-off, like on actually choosing it, or implementing it and figuring out how to use it in the long term. So I think it's a really interesting partnership, and I think or acquisition, not even partnership, but I think it'll be really, really interesting to see how this affects. And I think ultimately it's going to help lawyers make tech decisions.
It's a really interesting observation, read the cloud, Niki, and I hadn't really thought about that side of it, but I think that this really brings together the tech and the people bit. Sometimes the people get overlooked. Sometimes there's very much a focus on the technology, and actually, as we know, adoption is really terrible. The people almost get forgotten, and I think I did write about this. I'll post a link to it in the chat, but and got kind of sort of a steer, because my question was to both the CEOs of Lawyerist and Affinity was, why are these better together than, what makes it a better business? What is it that it brings? And they were saying, that it's all about starting and growing a healthy law firm from all the different angles. And I actually I also, like you, find it quite compelling, I have to say. Post it in the chat.
All right. Well, as we've alluded to already, lots of chat about Chat GPT and GPT 3.5 and whatever else is coming down the road. But Victor, you had a story this week that suggests that some people are taking the attitude of hear no evil, see no evil toward all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was. The story that I had was that New York public schools have blocked access to it because they're worried that they're mainly worried that kids are going to use it to cheat on their assignments. Hey, my generation, we had the buying term papers off the internet thing. I'm sure there was something before that there's always a way to cheat, right? There's always ways to do it, and it's just like. Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's also concerns about inaccuracy in the results and whatnot. And I mean, after the whole thing with, when it first came out, like I think like the rest of you, I played around with it as well, and I found some things that came up that weren't correct. But I mean, but that's the thing, right? It's just like, you improve the technology through using it and through training it and whatnot. It's not meant to be just a complete substitute for your own way of doing research and your own methods and whatnot. But I guess what they're worried about is that because it's not quite plagiarism, because you're not copying something. You're copying what Chat GPT comes up with, but you're not copying something that's been published by someone else or that's already has a copyright on it or whatnot. And so, yeah, I understand sort of the implication of that, and sort of why students would be drawn to something like that, especially if they don't feel like doing the work. But yeah, I mean, it also kind of strikes me as the same kind of issue with like when Wikipedia first came out. People were worried, oh well, there's so much fake stuff on there that we have to ban people from using it, and therefore they won't rely on it and whatnot. I was like, well, yeah, but on the other hand, you also cut them off from a certain area of technology that can be used well, and you also kind of cut them off from being able to kind of then use that as a jumping off point to then doing your own research and whatnot, and coming up with something on your own. So I guess, but knowing students and knowing how they can be, I guess I can understand why that would be a compelling argument to not allow it. So it'll be interesting to see if more schools kind of jump on that. I mean, New York helps. I mean, I used to live in the city. They're definitely a very powerful group, and a very they're one of the groups that get a lot of attention, and a lot of attention from the media, and people tend to follow them and whatnot. So we'll see if this catches on with other school districts and whatnot. I think it might. So we'll see.
Well, but it's ultimately a little bit silly though, isn't it? Because it's not like the students only access the internet through the devices and network at the school. They have smartphones when they're like 12 or 10 years and up, and they access through their data on their smartphones. They access the internet through their home, network on Wi-Fi, and through Starbucks Wi-Fi, whatever. They're going to be able to access Chat GPT all over the place. So blocking it from just the New York City schools is kind of stupid. It doesn't even do anything other than kind of look like a weird, not necessarily positive PR stunt, because it's a stupid thing to do in the first place. So I think it's I think it's an interesting move, but I think it's weird.
Whoa. The current New York City government makes symbolic but ultimately empty gestures? No, not this administration.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually like, I was a little bit naivete on my part, because I had always thought about, using it to plagiarize college essays and things. And when it got to be like New York City public schools, I was like, oh, right, the kids use technology these days. But in terms of not just, just the pure cheating and your point that you can access it from anywhere, it was related a little bit, is that I thought it was interesting that probably for the higher levels, I don't know that elementary schools would invest in this, but they're working on a way to put a watermark within the actual, like the metadata of it, so you can see if the text you submit was generated by Chat GPT.
Just ask Chat GPT how to get around that.
That's my question too. I'm not sure how that works, but they're clearly cognizant of this issue. And if they can figure out some sort of inherent watermark, that's just, I don't know. This just keeps opening other avenues, which is fascinating.
If you put in the Notes app, it erases I'm pretty sure that there's really easy ways to erase all of the metadata and just have text. So I don't know. I feel like you just it's just like everything else. Like, I think Bob, Wikipedia, like I can't remember who talked about Wikipedia, but it's, kids had encyclopedias before that, and they copied out of the encyclopedias. It's like everything else. Like tech is just an extension of other tech and of like the actual, written stuff, whatever, the old school stuff. And we've been dealing with these issues forever, and kids are always going to cheat. They shouldn't. My kids, of course, never did, but everyone else's do.
And to this point also, like the encyclopedias, I actually think this is much better than that, because encyclopedias used to be the sort of thing that was a mark of privilege that like would replicate itself. People who had the families who had a set of encyclopedias at home were not every family, and those kids were able to copy everything out of it and get an A on the paper because nobody could check it. Like, I mean, we all joked in the 90s, or not joked, we thought it was serious then, that the internet was was going to be this thing that democratized access in the universe, and that didn't turn out. But this is one that, at least right now, is democratizing access to good cheating. You can get access to this in ways that rich kids could always. And like, look, wait, this is also the week that the Varsity Blues mastermind got sentenced, but like, people used to be able to leverage their wealth into good cheating. Now everyone can.
I love that.
But now, go ahead, Caroline. I'm sorry.
No, I love that. I was just going to say also, given the profession that they're going into, and the kind of I've got kids running around my house as usual, and given that obviously I'm not naive enough to think that every legal professional is going to be above the law, Joe too, but it feels like it feels like this is totally the wrong tack to take, right? That just by blocking it, you're supposed to be teaching ethics and values and being above, and not being above the law. I suppose it's quite the opposite, actually. But, being and by saying, well, actually, we're going to treat you like 5-year-olds and we're just going to block it, seems to be completely the wrong tack. Above the law is the wrong thing. I was saying, sorry, that was that was the wrong expression.
You and everyone else in the legal industry say that to me all the time.
It seems nuts that they're going, yeah, anyway.
But we will never know who actually authored something. I mean, this week I wrote a poem about Stephanie, and I got a comment on LinkedIn saying, "But I thought Chat GPT wrote that," and I was offended. I mean, who knows? You just never know anymore.
I've got to tell you, Bob. I'm going to tell you. I put into Chat GPT, name some well-known legal tech journalists, and you were the only person it named. I'm still unhappy, and I'm never going to use Chat GPT ever again, ever.
You were using the old version.
Whoa. Wow, that is.
I was going to keep it.
Why was that not your story?
I was going to keep it.
Really?
Oh my God! And none of us, apart from Bob, were on that.
We should have started with that story today. We can
So-
do a whole episode about that next week.
And I'm like, how do I make my name appear on Chat GPT?
Change it to Bob Ambrogi.
Greg Lambert goes, only has a nice name.
Oh,
All right.
for those who are not live with us, who are listening to us on a podcast later, in the comments we have an answer to that, which was it only has data up to 1980. Oh, we also have, is that why Bob got invited? Was the only one invited to TLC?
Exactly. Because they use Chat GPT to make the guest list. That explains it.
Sometimes we forget that we see all these live comments, and everyone should listen to us live, of course, but anyone who's listening to us on the podcast might be missing these, but it's pure genius. You should join us for live.
Yeah. I may be Zoom challenged, but I thought I had actually set this to record the chat as well, but I guess it doesn't record it on the video. It actually downloads the chat, which is, who cares about that? But I don't know if there's a way to embed that in the video so that people can see it when it gets posted. All of these are on YouTube, by the way. If people miss an episode, you can go to YouTube and just search for Legal Tech Week, and all of our episodes are up there. So Caroline, was that going to be your top story of the week? The fact that I showed up in Chat GPT,
No,
or did you have anything else you wanted to talk about?
I meant to keep it a secret, but unfortunately,
okay.
I'm a really
Well, we won't tell anybody.
Yeah, at least I didn't mention it in public. So to be honest, my stories I'm not sure compared to some of the drama. So I quite liked the Wolters Kluwer acquisition of Della. That was quite interesting. And then also there's the Proskauer Rose COO, who's alleged to have overridden internal procedures in order to steal confidential information. That was filed just before Christmas. He denies it, I should say, and it is alleged. But I thought that was quite interesting because we talk a lot about security and compliance, but in the complaint that was filed at the end of December, the firm claims that he used his position as COO. They've got controls internally to stop people copying information to USB sticks and all of that kind of stuff. But their allegation is that he used his position to persuade an IT employee to do it for him, saying that it was for an external consultant. And also alleged that he persuaded an e-discovery assistant to delete emails, even though he was under a hold. So it just got me thinking, you know, irrespective of that, like you can have all of the controls in the world, you know, in terms of, we talk a lot about security and compliance, but it just got me thinking about, you know, how obviously in that kind of situation, it potentially just all falls down.
But it doesn't. They got him. And it was dumb that they got him. He's the chief operating officer. He doesn't realize there's a 30-day look back. They got him because he had done all this garbage on his system within 30 days of telling him they were going to leave.
Yeah, because he quit on the 20th.
Do it 31 days. That's not legal advice, but do it 31 days. How is this guy a chief operating officer and not understand what the IT department's policies are? Like, I was blown away by how stupid this was. And the litigation hold thing, that'll be the nice part of this. The litigation hold thing does, you know, it is the absolute proof of concept for all of those vendors that we talk to. You know, case point, I know, like all these vendors who have been like, you know what, we introduced features about litigation holds that allow it to be like a switch flipped by Central. Yeah, that's why you do this, for this exact reason. Oh, yeah, no, I mean, I didn't think it was a story about it all falling down. I thought it was a story of it all working. And if anything, a story about how it might not have worked had this person been 1% smarter. And by 1%, I mean 31 days.
Oh, I thought it was a story about how, you know, data loss often occurs more, you know, typically occurs. Everyone's afraid of breach and, you know, brute force attacks and stuff, which occasionally happen, but more often than not, it's an employee. You know, you have an employee that either makes a stupid move by clicking on a phishing link, or else an employee who steals the data. Oftentimes your employees are your weakest link, and people are to be a lot more worried about that than they are about, brute force attacks, because most law firms are too small and don't have enough really interesting and useful information to be subject to a brute force attack. But they have enough information that's going to be valuable somewhere to someone. So but their employees are the weakest link. So that's what really stood out to me with it.
We talk, I think in the seniority, so we talk a lot about insiders being the weakest link. So with emails, you know, we've talked about it for a long time, you know, like your insiders are your weakest link. It's very unlikely. But this, I mean, there have been two stories in the press recently, haven't there? You know, about the C-suite being in the line of fire in terms of being alleged impropriety. And I just think if that was the interesting angle. We talked a lot about insiders. We talked a lot about how to prevent against, you know, people making dumb mistakes. But this just jumped out because not very often that we write about the C-suite in this kind of context. Not all that often.
All right. Well, anything else? Anybody else want to talk about? I know actually, I don't know, we want to touch real quick stuff about your other story about the do not pay. That was kind of an interesting one that came up in a couple of minutes we have left here.
Yeah, more Chat GPT. Yay. No, do not pay has been incorporating it as more than a lot of people. And their new thing is that, because they first started using it to fight traffic tickets, and now they're actually sending a robo lawyer to court. I've just Chat GPT with a cell phone, or I don't know how it actually works, but they have a person who has agreed to let Chat GPT go to court, or do not pay, go to court on their behalf and deal with whatever the outcome is, and have them solely just argue the ticket.
Yeah, so the way it's going to work, the way I understand it from what I read, is that the person is going to go into court, but is going to have you're going to have do not pay running on their phone and their headphones or something, and they're not going to say anything that the app doesn't tell them to say. So the app will be listening to what happens in court and then tell the person what to say in response to what happens in court. I want to know which judge in the world is allowing that to happen, because no judge, no courtroom I've ever been in would allow that to be happening. And they won't say, they're not saying what court or who the person is for privacy reasons, I guess.
I've been in a traffic court before. That is
Good.
not the same level of judge. I don't want to besmirch anyone out there, but that is not the same level of judge that you might be used to.
I mean, I don't even know if they
In
cleared it
Massachusetts it
because
is,
the
yeah.
person, like, you can just walk into traffic court without anything, right, on your own. So the judge might not even know that.
I
Some
don't know if
courts in
any-
Massachusetts won't even let you bring a mobile phone into the courtroom.
true.
So
I don't know if
Yeah.
anyone's watching Murderville on Netflix, but that's a whole part of the shtick. It's about
Yeah.
how the actors, everyone is scripted except for the comedian that's the guest. And at one point, during every single episode, one of the actors who has a script tells the comedian who's the guest to put in an earphone and go into this situation and say everything that the person tells them to say. And it's always ends up being just a ridiculous mess. So I think people should watch one episode of Murderville, which is very funny, but also to see how that can go awry.
This goes to Caroline, because Murderville is an adaptation of a British show, which I assume she's more familiar with. Yes or no? You're muted.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Oh, really? It went for like multiple seasons in the UK before it came here.
Was it Midsummer Murders? No.
No. It's they had like Emma
I was trying to find the link
Murder
to
in
my
Successville.
chat.
Murder in Successville. Yes, that's what it was.
I don't know. That doesn't sound like a big hit over here, I'm not gonna lie, but then I'm not a massive TV watcher.
It's BBC Three.
So is that streaming?
Yeah, I don't want. Yeah, I'm not sure. I didn't watch that.
Fair enough. Point is, it's a cute concept that the Americans now have, and so, like a lot of great things, we're going to claim that we run it now.
like Prince Harry.
Like exactly.
Like Prince Harry.
We were going to get through the whole thing without mentioning. Didn't we agree that we were not going to mention Prince Harry?
I don't think we talked about that.
No one agreed to that. Wow. Caroline's channeling her inner Queen Elizabeth. I've decided we're not going to talk about this. Okay.
Oh God. No, it's it's everywhere here, as you can imagine. It probably is everywhere there as well. And my favorite tweet with regard to make it Prince Harry was, please someone make it stop.
You know what's interesting, we have that tweet here too, except it's about Kevin McCarthy's votes for speaker.
Yeah.
I feel like that should be the motto for 2023. Just please someone make it stop.
It's so true. And it's only day 6. What can go?
It's going to be a good year. It's going to be a good year. And we will be back to talk more about what a good year it was next week. And hopefully there'll be some interesting stuff to talk about next week. So until then, everybody have a great week. And thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.